In a city veiled by towering skyscrapers and swarming alleys where the wealthy play the dangerous game of influence, can truth find its voice against the deafening echo of corruption? Inside the ornate, intimidating architecture of the city courthouse, murals of Lady Justice graced the walls, her scales slightly tarnished, much like the integrity of those who passed beneath her gaze each day. The large courtroom buzzed with the muted whirl of hushed conversations and shuffled papers, as today marked the critical point of an extensively watched corruption trial. The air was thick with anticipation and fraught with undercurrents of anxiety. Pam Bondi, seasoned prosecutor known for her unflinching resolve and incisive intellect, stood at her table reviewing her notes one last time. Her face was a mask of concentration, unaffected by the heavy stares or the tension that filled the room. She was about to confront a colossus of economic power and political connections, Charles Lawson, the magnate developer whose projects dotted the skyline but whose moral compass seemed, at best, poorly calibrated. Sitting high above on his bench, Judge Howard Gates presented a picture of judicial dignity, his expression unreadable. Yet those close to the proceedings knew of swirling rumors, whispers that, however faint, suggested his impartiality might be compromised by the very web of corruption this trial aimed to unravel. Charles Lawson himself exuded a confidence that brushed the edge of arrogance. Dressed impeccably in a designer suit, he occasionally whispered to his cadre of expensive lawyers, smirking as if the trial was a mere inconvenience rather than a threat to his empire. As Pam stepped forward to begin her opening remarks, the room fell into a tense silence, every pair of eyes fixed upon her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pam began, her voice clear and resonant, "this trial is not merely about the illegal transactions of a wealthy developer, nor is it simply about bribery or nepotism. This is a trial about the very foundation upon which our city stands. It is about whether justice truly is blind or if her scales have been tipped in favor of those who can afford to manipulate them." Judge Gates shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around his gavel. Pam continued undeterred, "We will present irrefutable evidence that Mr. Charles Lawson, with the collusion of certain influential figures, has corrupted public officials, subverted our legal frameworks, and pilfered from the public coffers, all in the pursuit of personal gain." The audience murmured, and Lawson exchanged a tense glance with his lead lawyer. "Furthermore," Pam added, staring directly at Judge Gates, her tone steady and accusing, "we will show that this corruption has reached into the very heart of our judicial system, questioning the very integrity of those appointed to protect and enforce our laws." Judge Gates frowned. "Ms. Bondi, ensure your statements inside this courtroom are substantiated by evidence," he warned, his voice cool. "Absolutely, Your Honor," Pam replied with a slight nod. "The truth has a way of coming back around, even if it has been redirected or suppressed." As Pam presented her case, bringing forward witnesses and undeniable evidence, the mood in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. Lawson's confidence started to crack, while whispers about Judge Gates's potential involvement grew louder. Pam's relentless pursuit of truth not only tested the courtroom's comfort, but also echoed through the city streets, rallying cries for justice in a system that seemed rigged for the rich and powerful. In a climactic turn, a previously unknown witness approached Pam with damning evidence that linked Lawson directly to Judge Gates, setting the stage for a showdown that would shake the city to its core. As Pam prepared for her final remarks, the weight of her responsibility bore down on her. She wasn't just fighting Lawson or exposing a corrupt judge, she was battling for the soul of the justice system itself. As the afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the august courtroom, casting kaleidoscopic shadows on the polished mahogany surfaces, An air of solemn tension hung palpably in the space. The trial of Charles Lawson had captured public and media attention, not merely because of his prominent stature as a wealthy developer, but due to the allegations that he was deeply entwined in a scandalous web of corruption involving several high-profile figures. Pam Bondi stood in the well of the courtroom, her expression composed yet steely. As an experienced prosecutor, she was accustomed to the courtroom's dramatics, but this case was particularly significant. It was not just a matter of law. It was a battle against an entrenched system of privilege and corruption. Across from her, sitting with an air of dispassionate authority, was Judge Howard Gates. His reputation for arrogance was well earned, and whispers of his involvement in questionable dealings had begun to surface. Yet his demeanor remained unflinchingly confident, a man secure in his power and the influence he wielded from the bench. Charles Lawson, meanwhile, maintained a facade of calm indifference. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he occasionally whispered to his defense lawyers, glancing around the courtroom with a smirk that hinted at his assurance in the outcome. After all, his connections had always insulated him from any substantial consequences. The court was packed, a mix of journalists eagerly taking notes, curious onlookers, and a few somber figures who had been directly affected by Lawson's corrupt dealings. The air was thick with anticipation. Pam stood up, ready to continue her fierce cross-examination of Lawson. Clearing her throat, she began, "Mr. Lawson, your development projects have transformed entire neighborhoods, yet they have also been marred by numerous allegations of bypassing legal protocols. How do you respond to these allegations?" Lawson gave a slight shrug, his voice smooth as he replied, "We always strive to comply with all applicable laws. Sometimes misunderstandings happen, but that's just part of the business." "Misunderstandings? Is that what you call bribing officials and exploiting the very community you claim to serve?" Pam's voice was calm, but carried a sharp edge. Judge Gates interjected, "Ms. Bondi, ensure your questions remain respectful and direct." Pam nodded, her gaze steady. "Of course, Your Honor. Mr. Lawson, let's talk about the East Side project. Evidence suggests you provided incentives to expedite approvals. How do you explain this?" Before Lawson could answer, a sudden commotion disrupted the somber proceedings. A man in the back of the courtroom stood up, waving a stack of documents. "I have proof," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Evidence of the bribes." Security moved to intercept him, but the damage was already done. The courtroom erupted into murmurs and exclamations as the man was led away, his claims hanging heavy in the air. Judge Gates banged his gavel, calling for order. "We will have a recess," he declared, his voice betraying a hint of agitation. "Trial will resume in 30 minutes. As the courtroom cleared, Pam approached the man who had interrupted the trial. He handed her the documents, eyes wide with urgency. "I used to work for Lawson," he whispered. "I couldn't stand the guilt anymore." Pam leafed through the papers quickly. Emails, bank statements, and memos that could potentially alter the course of the trial. This was the break she had been looking for. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. "This could change everything." The man nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and fear. "Just make sure the truth comes out." As Pam prepared herself for the next session, she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The system might be fraught with corruption and shielded by power, but she believed in the boomerang of truth. Sooner or later, it would find its way back and reveal everything. As the thick, velvety drapes of the courtroom swayed gently, the rays of the early morning sun pierced through, casting long shadows over the wooden panels of the grand room. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the anticipation of a crucial day in court. Murmurs ran through clusters of people gathered, their eyes locked on the central figures. Pam Bondi, a seasoned prosecutor known for her resoluteness and integrity, and Charles Lawson, the wealthy developer with too many contacts in high places, now caught in the web of corruption charges. Judge Howard Gates, sitting aloof on his higher bench, appeared calm, but his mind was a storm. A commanding figure with an ego polished through years of unchecked power, he was well aware that every decision he made could tip the scales in ways the public could not always see. "Order in the court," Judge Gates' voice boomed as he called the session to order, silencing the whispers. He eyed both Pam and Charles, his gaze lingering slightly longer than usual on the prosecutor, as if challenging her resolve. Pam stood up, her posture rigid, exuding an air of confidence that was necessary for today. She glanced briefly at the public gallery, the nervous faces of the city inhabitants who longed for justice staring back at her. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Pam began, clearing her throat. "Today, we peel back layers of deceit that have clouded the very foundations on which our community stands. We are here to ensure that corruption, no matter how richly draped in power and influence, is exposed and punished." Charles Lawson, clad in a perfectly tailored suit that screamed arrogance, smirked as his eyes met Pam's. His lawyer, a sly fox of a man, whispered something in his ear, causing a brief chuckle to escape Charles's lips. Judge Gates, noticing the exchange, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he turned to Pam. "Proceed, Miss Bondi." Over the next hour, Pam meticulously laid out the evidence against Charles, detailing illicit deals and bribes tied to city construction projects. Her voice was firm, each sentence punctuated for effect, as she walked the court through documents and testimonials that seemed irrefutable. However, just as the tide appeared to be turning, Judge Gates interjected. "Miss Bondi, while your enthusiasm for justice is commendable, we must also consider the pressures and realities of business dealings. Mr. Lawson, how do you respond to these serious accusations?" Charles rose, his confidence unshaken. "Your Honor, these claims are nothing but attempts to stifle the entrepreneurial spirit. Yes, I've made donations. Who hasn't? They're not bribes. They're contributions to the progress of our city." His tone was dismissive, almost mocking the proceedings. The courtroom buzzed with mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement with Charles, swayed by his portrayal as a benefactor, while others looked skeptical, disgusted by his thinly veiled justifications. Judge Gates nodded slightly at Charles's words, which did not go unnoticed by Pam. Her mind raced, piecing together past rulings and the judge's subtle nods of approval towards Charles. A chilling realization dawned upon her. The grip of corruption might be tighter and more expansive than she had feared. As the session adjourned for lunch, Pam approached an old, gray janitor who was often overlooked, yet saw everything. "Mr. Jenkins, have you ever noticed anything unusual in Judge Gates' chambers? Anything at all?" Mr. Jenkins paused, lowering his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but there's often a visitor, late nights, looks a lot like Mr. Lawson's associate. Always leaves with a handshake and a thick envelope." Armed with this new lead, Pam knew what she had to do. The battle was not just in proving Charles's guilt, but exposing the network that sustained it. She realized that uncovering the truth was not just about legal victory, but moral courage, the very essence of justice she vowed to uphold. Thus began her true fight, not just against Charles Lawson, but against a system rotting from within. The previously sunlit courtroom now seemed draped in darkness despite the lamps. Pam Bondi eyed Judge Howard Gates warily. Today could dismantle everything. The case, her progress, her belief in justice. As Charles Lawson, the charismatic developer, leaned back comfortably in his chair, Confident smirks flickered on his attorney's lips. Judge Gates had influence and swagger that stained the air, and the whispers of his secret dealings had never dared echo beyond hushed tones until now. On this pivotal day, as Pam prepared to present undeniable evidence involving a series of illicit property deals overseen by Lawson, her mouth felt dry. The atmosphere crackled with an unusual intensity, as though the old courtroom itself sensed a shift. "Your Honor," Pam started, making sure her tone didn't betray her suspicion, "I would like to submit the following evidence." But just as Pam was about to proceed, Judge Gates raised a hand, effectively silencing her. "Before you continue, Ms. Bondi, there is a matter that must be addressed." Every eye in the courtroom fixed on Judge Gates, but it was his next words that caused a stir unlike any other. "It has come to my attention," he continued, with a pause that seemed too calculated, "that certain allegations have been raised concerning my involvement in matters related to this case." The audience murmured, and Charles Lawson's once comfortable demeanor wavered. Pam's heart thudded wildly. This was unforeseen. A self-admission from the judge was not what anyone expected. "Allegations that, if true, could impede my ability to judge this case impartially," Judge Gates declared, his voice steady, but his fingers tensing around his gavel. "I am therefore stepping down from this case, effective immediately." Gasps echoed around the room. Pam stood frozen, processing the sudden turn. Charles Lawson's attorneys hurriedly whispered amongst themselves, their earlier confidence crumbling. A younger judge, Maria Lopez, known for her stringent adherence to ethical practices, stepped up to replace Judge Gates. Her reputation for fairness preceded her, renewing whispers of hope among Pam's team. "The trial will proceed after a short recess. Please prepare your continuances," Judge Lopez announced authoritatively. During the recess, Pam retreated to a quiet corner, her mind racing with possibilities. The departure of Judge Gates would change the dynamics of the courtroom significantly. Was this the boomerang of truth manifesting? The twist hinted at something deeper, a hidden mechanism that just got set into motion by the judge's own secret surfacing, secrets that perhaps concerned Lawson as well. "Ms. Bondi," a soft voice called out. Pam turned to see a junior clerk, someone she'd seen hovering in the courthouse halls but never spoke to directly. He looked nervous, glancing around before speaking. "I think you should see this," he whispered, handing her a sealed envelope. It was in the judge's files, marked for shredding, mistakenly given to interns for disposal. Eyebrows raised, Pam opened the envelope. Inside were documents linking Judge Gates to several offshore accounts and communications with none other than Charles Lawson. The implications were massive. The judge had indeed been compromised. Re-energized by the clerk's unexpected intervention and the contents of the envelope, Pam walked back into the courtroom, the tangible proof of immediate justice burning in her hands. The young clerk's bravery and Judge Lopez's sudden takeover painted a fresh, hopeful canvas. Maybe, just maybe, the solo fighter wasn't so alone in the battle after all. As she re-entered, the new judge nodded slightly at her, the silent urgency of justice hanging between them. Pam Bondi was ready to end this entangled drama of power and corruption. The truth was indeed fearsome, a boomerang that always returned to toss the balance of power. In the dimly lit courtroom, the air was thick with tension. It was the final day of the trial, and the wooden benches were packed with spectators, reporters scribbling furiously into their notebooks. The overhead fans swirled lazily, doing little to dispel the underlying current of anticipation. The case of corruption against Charles Lawson had gripped the city, drawing rapt attention to the courtroom where Pam Bondi, the seasoned prosecutor, was delivering her final arguments. Pam stood confidently at the podium, her eyes steely and focused. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice echoing through the hushed court. "This trial is not only about the defendant's misuse of power and trust. It is a testament to our fight against a system infected with corruption, a system that favors the rich and powerful over the honest, hardworking citizens of our community." Across the room, Judge Howard Gates watched her from his elevated bench, his expression unreadable. While known for his arrogance and behind-the-scenes manipulations, he was aware that every eye was on him, scrutinizing his every move amidst this high-profile case. Unknown to all in the room, his own links to Lawson threatened to unravel, his career hanging by a thread. Charles Lawson, sitting stiffly beside his defense attorney, maintained an air of indifference. His tailored suit and perfectly combed hair portrayed the image of success, but his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. He had underestimated Pam Bondi, dismissing her as just another hurdle on his path to further power. As Pam concluded her forceful argument, calling for justice and integrity, the courtroom burst into a murmuring. She pointed directly at Lawson. "This man," she declared, "has not only tarnished his own integrity but has attempted to corrode the very pillars of justice that hold our society together." Breaking the intense silence that followed, Judge Gates called for the closing statements, his voice slightly wavering. The defense's plea seemed weak and faltering under Pam's unwavering resolve. As they concluded, Gates adjourned the court for the jury to deliberate, his gavel sounding unusually loud in the now still courtroom. Hours turned tense as the jury was sequestered. Pam retreated to her office, her mind racing through every detail of the trial. Meanwhile, Judge Gates remained in his chambers, his anxiety peaking as he pondered the repercussions of the impending verdict. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom snapped to attention, the atmosphere electric. Pam stood, her posture resolute as the verdict was read. "Guilty on all counts." The words resonated through the chamber like a thunderclap. A wave of subdued cheers rippled through the gathered crowd. Lawson's face paled, the gravity of his situation finally settling in. Judge Gates, maintaining his composed demeanor, sentenced Lawson to a significant term, his voice firm. "Let this be a reminder," he stated, "that justice sees no status, no power. It only sees the truth." As the courtroom emptied, Pam's eyes met Judge Gates. For a moment, it seemed as though an understanding passed between them, a mutual acknowledgement of the precarious balance they tread in the pursuit of justice. It was a momentary truce in a continuing war against corruption. Outside, the reporters swarmed Pam, her triumph the headline of every story. But more important to her than the accolades was the small, knowing smile she afforded herself. In her heart, she felt the weight of victory, not just for herself, but for the integrity of the system she vowed to protect. The truth had indeed acted like a boomerang, returning to uphold justice where it was most threatened. As we approach the climax of our intense narrative, the courthouse, a grand structure of marble and echoes, serves as the battleground for an epic showdown. The walls, steeped in the history of prior judgments, seem to whisper echoes of justice and deceit. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation as the community, media, and the power elite converge to witness the outcome of a trial that has captivated the city's attention. Pam Bondi, with her unwavering stance and eyes reflecting the weight of her mission, stands ready for the final proceedings. Across from her, Charles Lawson, the embattled yet defiant developer, maintains his composed facade, though his nervous glances betray an underlying anxiety. Above them all presides Judge Howard Gates, an imperious figure who commands the room with a practiced aloofness, while silently nursing the dread of his secrets being unearthed. The final arguments have been made, and as the jury deliberates, the tension is palpable. The courtroom's stale air feels heavier as each participant mentally revisits the evidence laid bare over the past weeks. The silence is finally broken by the solemn return of the jury. We, the jury, find the defendant, Charles Lawson, guilty on all counts of corruption. A collective gasp fills the room. Pam Bondi's tight professional facade gives way to the slightest uplift in her lips, a sign not of triumph, but relief. Charles Lawson's face hardens as he processes the verdict, his lawyer's hand on his shoulder in cold comfort. Judge Gates, for all his attempt to remain undisturbed, cannot help but clench his jaw. With a heavy hand, he confirms, the court accepts the jury's decision. Sentencing will be held next week. As the courtroom slowly empties, Pam stands still for a moment, absorbing the weight of what this victory represents. Not just a legal win, but a crack in the formidable wall of systemic corruption. Outside, under the stone arches of the courthouse, Pam faces a sea of microphones and reporters. She states firmly, "Today's verdict is not just a win for this case alone. It is a precedent that no one, regardless of their position or power, is above the law." The narrative takes us back inside the courthouse to a dimly lit anteroom where Judge Howard Gates finds himself confronted by an unexpected visitor, Miriam, an unassuming clerk who is more observant than most realize. "Your Honor, the winds of justice don't discriminate," she says, her voice steady despite her apparent nervousness. "Secrets have a way of coming to light when we least expect them." Her words hang heavy in the air, a subtle reminder of the boomerang of truth that haunts those who deal in deception. Fast forward to the sentencing. Scenes of Charles Lawson receiving his consequence are interwoven with those of Judge Gates in his chambers, laboriously sorting through papers that hint at resignations rather than judicial duties. As the story wraps up, the camera pans over the city at dusk, its skyline a silhouette against a bruised purple sky. A narrative voice, mature and reflective, cuts through. In a world where shadows are cast by towers of power, the light of truth remains persistent. Pam Bondi's relentless pursuit of justice, against all odds, assures us that while solitary in her battle, she is mighty in her cause. Today, justice didn't just speak, it roared. The final impression leaves us with a cityscape that slowly lights up as night falls. Each light a testament to the resilience of those who fight the darkness, reminding us all that while justice requires sacrifice, its triumph is for the collective good, echoing infinitely in the hearts that dare to uphold it.